The forest was silent, but not in the way that promised peace. It was the kind of silence that pressed heavy on your chest as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Out of the darkness, a shape stumbled forward, an old red wolf limping each step, leaving a faint trace on the cold earth. His ribs showed under his ragged fur. His paw dragged blood, marking the trail behind him. He had survived storms, fights, and hunger, but tonight his strength was gone. Then light. A single beam of a flashlight cut through the fog. A ranger's voice whispered into the night. "Hello, did you hear that?" The beam swept across the undergrowth and there collapsed against the roots of a fallen oak. The wolf's eyes glowed back, golden, tired, but still alive. For a moment, time stopped. Human and wolf stared at each other, two creatures who were never meant to share this kind of closeness. She had been trained to stay cautious, to keep distance from predators. Yet in those eyes, she didn't see a predator, she saw exhaustion, pain, and something else. A plea. She took one step closer. The wolf's chest rose in shallow breaths. He did not growl. He did not run. He simply closed his eyes as if surrendering. And then something happened that no one expected. Her name was Claire Thompson. For most people in North Carolina, she was just another ranger patrolling the state forests. But behind the uniform was a story shaped by childhood summers in these same woods, where her father taught her to track deer and her grandmother told her legends of wolves that once ruled the land. Claire had always felt the forest was alive not just with trees and rivers, but with memory. She wasn't supposed to be here tonight. A shift swap with a colleague had put her on this trail at this hour. Yet destiny often waits for accidents. And on this particular evening, the accident was an old red wolf staggering into her path. Claire's life was a mixture of order and chaos. Order came from the daily patrols, the paperwork, the wildlife monitoring. Chaos came from the unexpected, a bear wandering into a campsite, a poacher's trap hidden under fallen leaves, a storm tearing through fragile enclosures at the rehabilitation center. But nothing compared to the sight of this animal. The Albemarle Peninsula, one of the last wild refuges of the American red wolf. Decades ago, this landscape was nearly silent of their howls. By the 1980s, the red wolf was declared extinct in the wild. Captive breeding and reintroduction changed that, but barely. Today, fewer than 30 survive in freedom. Every howl that carries through these woods is a miracle, a reminder of a species clawing back from the brink. For Claire, every patrol was more than a job, it was a vigil. She knew the numbers. She knew that the survival of red wolves wasn't guaranteed by policies or paperwork, but by individual lives, by each wolf that lived another day, another season, long enough to breed, to pass its resilience on. And tonight, one such life hung by a thread. Claire had joined the Wildlife Service a decade earlier, drawn not by glamour, but by grit. She learned to stitch wounds on the roadside, to measure the wingspan of injured hawks, to comfort frightened children who stumbled upon a fox den. Her colleagues called her stubborn. She called it necessary. At the rehabilitation center, she was known for one thing above all: patience. Wolves did not trust easily. But Claire never rushed. She waited. She spoke softly. She let silence do the work. It was this patience that earned her the nickname, the woman who listens to howls. But patience alone could not heal every wound. Some animals arrived too broken. Others died before dawn. Each loss was a weight she carried. That's why when she first saw the old wolf collapse in the forest, her heart clenched with dread. She knew she might already be too late. And yet there was something different here. The wolf was old, but not defeated. The way he lifted his head, even with pain burning through his body, told her he was still fighting. She couldn't walk away. Claire loaded him carefully into the rescue carrier, her hands steady, but her mind racing. She thought of the center's limited resources, the long nights ahead, the scrutiny from supervisors. She thought of the farmers who still cursed the name wolf and would see this rescue as betrayal. Still she drove. Every mile of that dark road back to the rehabilitation center felt like carrying history itself. If this wolf survived, his story would ripple beyond these woods. If he died, the silence would deepen. This was the beginning of a fragile bond, one stitched not by words, but by survival. In the coming days, she would learn just how thin the line was between despair and hope. And in the eyes of this battered old wolf, she would find both. The night the old wolf collapsed beneath the oak tree became more than a patrol shift. It became a crossroad. Claire parked her truck outside the center, the red glow of the taillights spilling over the gravel. She moved quickly, unlocking the gate, whispering reassurances, even though she knew the wolf couldn't understand. Inside the carrier, the wolf stirred weakly. His eyes flicked open just enough to catch the fluorescent light above the intake bay. There was no snarl, no lunge, no fight left in him, only a quiet acceptance. That was the first moment Claire's fear slipped away. Most predators met humans with teeth even in weakness. But this wolf, he simply watched her, as though weighing the balance between trust and surrender. Claire felt her chest tighten. She realized she was no longer looking at a wolf, but at this wolf. A singular being, scarred, worn, but dignified. Her training screamed caution. An adult red wolf, even injured, could crush bone with its jaws. Regulations were clear. No ranger worked alone with predators. Yet here she was, the only staff on call, standing with a life on the edge of darkness. She radioed her supervisor. No response. Static. The storm that had been brewing all evening must have knocked out the signal. Claire's heartbeat quickened. She faced a choice: wait for help that might never come in time, or act now against protocol. Her fingers tightened on the latch. The door swung open. For a split second, she braced for teeth. Instead, the wolf slumped forward, collapsing onto the floor, his legs trembling too hard to stand. Claire dropped to her knees. "Easy. It's okay," she murmured, voice trembling. She slid a blanket under his body, pulling him gently onto the mat. The smell of blood mixed with the sharp scent of antiseptic. His fur was coarse, bristled with burrs and dried mud. She ran a hand, gloved, careful, over his flank, finding ribs that jutted like the frame of a broken ship. The wolf shivered, but did not resist. His breath came in shallow gasps. Yet when their eyes met again, she saw something unbroken, something quietly pleading. She whispered, not to calm him, but to calm herself. Words had no meaning here, only tone. And her tone said, "I will not leave you." For hours she worked, cleaning the wound where metal teeth of a trap had torn into his leg, flushing infection, stitching carefully, each pull of the thread echoing in the sterile room. She spooned a slurry of warm broth toward his muzzle. At first he refused. Then, with trembling effort, he lapped once, twice, and swallowed. That moment, small, fragile, but real, felt like a pact. By dawn, the storm had passed. Rain streaked the windows, casting silver veins across the walls. Claire sat against the table, exhaustion pulling at her eyes. On the mat, the wolf slept, breath steadier now. He was still weak, still hovering at the edge, but alive. Claire had crossed a line that night. Not a line of law, but of fate. She had chosen to intervene, to become part of this wolf's story, and in doing so, she had allowed him into hers. The fateful encounter had begun not with a chase, not with fear, but with surrender. In that surrender, a bond was born, fragile as glass, yet strong enough to carry them both into what lay ahead. The first days were the hardest. Wolves were not meant to lie still under human roofs, breathing recycled air wrapped in the scent of antiseptic. The old wolf fought silently, his eyes half closed, his body heavy, but his spirit refusing to let go. Claire watched every rise and fall of his chest, as though it were the ticking of a fragile clock. The wound on his leg was deep torn, where the steel trap had bitten into muscle. Each morning, Claire cleaned it carefully, replacing bandages while speaking in a steady rhythm. Words were less important than tone, and her tone said safe, safe, safe. At first he resisted food. He turned his muzzle away, lips tightening as if even swallowing was too great a burden. But Claire refused to yield. She prepared broth from venison stock, mixing it thin spooning droplets near his mouth. On the third day his tongue flicked. On the fourth he drank. By the fifth he swallowed an entire bowl, his ribs still sharp, but his eyes brighter. Nights were different. In the quiet hours when generators hummed and frogs sang in the wetlands, the wolf stirred. Sometimes he rose on trembling legs, pacing a few steps before collapsing again. Sometimes he tilted his muzzle upward, releasing a low, broken howl, half memory, half longing. Claire sat nearby, notebook in hand, recording every sound. But the truth was, she listened less as a scientist and more as a witness. These howls were not data, they were grief. There were setbacks. On the seventh day, infection flared, the wound reddened pus rising beneath the stitches. His body trembled with fever. Claire rushed, flushing the wound, administering antibiotics under veterinary instruction. For 12 hours he lay motionless. She thought she had lost him, but in the cold hours before dawn, his eyes opened. They found hers in the half-light. Slowly he shifted, pressing his weight forward, resting his head against the bars. Not aggression, not fear, simply presence, as though saying, "I am still here." Day by day, strength returned. His steps grew steadier. His appetite widened, first broth, then ground meat, then bones. He cracked with aging but determined jaws. Claire tested his mobility, opening the pen into a small exercise yard. He limped at first, circling awkwardly. Then he trotted, ears pricking to sounds of the forest beyond. With each step he revealed who he was. Not just a wounded animal, but a survivor. He howled again, stronger now, the sound rising into the canopy. For the first time, other voices answered, distant, faint, but real. A wild pack still roamed these woods, and he remembered them. Their bond deepened not through touch. Wolves rarely tolerated human closeness, but through patience. She sat quietly while he ate. She waited while he explored. When he howled, she did not interrupt. In return, he began to approach when she entered, nose-twitching ears angled toward her voice. But danger lingered. Twice, inspectors from the Wildlife Agency arrived. They reminded her this was not a pet. Red wolves could not be habituated to humans. If he grew too tame, he could never survive in the wild. Claire nodded, masking the conflict burning inside. She knew they were right. And yet, when she looked at him, she felt the pull of something deeper. The greatest trial came unexpectedly. One evening, as the horizon burned orange, the wolf collapsed mid-stride. His chest convulsed, breaths erratic. Panic surged through Claire, heart failure perhaps, or infection spreading unseen. She rushed forward, kneeling at his side. His eyes rolled back. For minutes that felt like eternity, he lay motionless. Then a twitch. His paw flexed. His chest rose again, weak but insistent. He lived. Claire pressed her forehead to the cold bars, tears blurring her vision. In that moment, she realized she was no longer only a ranger. She was a companion in survival, bound to his fate as surely as he was bound to hers. Survival was never meant to be easy for wolves, for humans, for bonds forged in unlikely places. But through every setback, through every brush with death, one truth grew undeniable: they needed each other. And soon, both would be tested in ways neither could imagine. By the time summer storms arrived, the wolf had regained much of his strength. His gait was still uneven, but his body carried new weight, his eyes clearer, his howl louder. Claire believed they had survived the worst. But nature has a way of reminding us that survival is never guaranteed. It began with a rumble, at first distant like the growl of some unseen beast moving across the horizon. The sky darkened faster than seemed possible. Winds whipped branches sideways, slamming pine cones against the pen's wire. By dusk, the storm hit in full, a hurricane-force gale tearing through the rehabilitation center. Lightning carved across the sky, splitting the night into jagged shards. Power lines sparked, and then the lights died. The hum of generators faltered. The facility plunged into darkness. Claire grabbed a lantern and sprinted to the wolf's enclosure. The wind was so strong it nearly ripped the door from her hands. Inside, the wolf spun in panic, muzzle lifted growl, drowned by the storm's roar. His eyes met hers, wide, reflecting the glow of the lantern. Then the ceiling groaned. A branch thick as a man's torso snapped free from above, crashing against the roof of the pen. Metal shrieked. The structure buckled. Claire lunged forward, pulling the emergency latch. Rain lashed her face, stinging like shards of glass. She swung the gate open just as the roof caved inward, timbers crashing into the pen. The wolf darted past her, limping but swift, out into the rain. She stumbled after him, mud swallowing her boots. All around, trees toppled, fences collapsed, water surged in violent sheets. She called his name, though she had never given him one. The word still tore from her throat like instinct. Through the downpour, she saw him struggling against rising water near the drainage ditch. His injured leg dragged his body, sinking deeper as the current pulled. Without thinking, Claire plunged after him. The current seized her legs, pulling hard, nearly toppling her. She clawed forward, hands tearing against roots and rocks, until she reached his side. His jaws snapped not at her, but at the water, desperate, wild. She wrapped her arms under his chest, heaving upward. Together they fought the torrent, each step a war. The ditch was no longer water, but a river swollen with fury. Every second threatened to drag them under. Finally, with a last surge, she shoved him onto solid ground. He collapsed, soaked, trembling, but alive. Claire dragged herself beside him, lungs burning. Above them, lightning struck a pine tree, the blast showering sparks into the rain. For a moment, everything was illuminated. Woman and wolf lying side by side, survivors pressed against the edge of the storm. For hours the storm raged. They huddled together beneath the overhang of a collapsed shed. The wolf's body shivered against hers, not in fear, but in raw instinct to conserve heat. Claire's hand rested lightly on his back, feeling each tremor, each heartbeat. She knew they might not survive if the winds worsened. But dawn came, as dawn always does. The storm retreated, leaving silence broken only by dripping water. The center lay in ruins, fences, twisted trees, uprooted buildings scarred. Yet within the wreckage, 2 lives had endured. The wolf turned to her. For the first time, he closed the distance willingly. Limping, soaked, battered, he stepped until his muzzle was inches from her hand. She froze, breath caught. Slowly, carefully, he pressed his head against her palm. It lasted only seconds. But in those seconds, every barrier between them dissolved. When the emergency crews arrived hours later, they found Claire repairing fences with bloodied hands, the wolf pacing nearby like a shadow that refused to leave her side. Against all odds, both had survived the storm. But in surviving together, they had crossed into something far deeper. They were no longer just ranger and wolf. They were allies bound by rain, by danger, by the unspoken vow of survival. The storm had tried to erase them both. Instead, it had carved them into something unbreakable. Woman and wolf survivors of the same night, standing together at the edge of a world forever changed. The storm passed, but it left more than broken fences and uprooted trees. It left questions. Questions that could not be answered with stitches or rebuilt enclosures. Questions of law, of community, of what it truly meant to hold a wolf's life in human hands. News of the rescue spread quickly. A neighbor driving by had seen Claire leading the wolf into the rehabilitation center weeks earlier. At first, whispers floated through town, admiration, curiosity. But admiration quickly tangled with suspicion. Farmers in the region had long memories. Their fathers had lost calves and goats to predators, and though red wolves were few now, the fear lingered. To some, Claire's act wasn't compassion. It was betrayal. Soon officials from the Wildlife Service arrived. They praised her efforts, yes, but they also raised concerns. A wolf too accustomed to humans might never return to the wild, and if he couldn't be released, he would need permanent captivity. That meant resources, permits, endless bureaucracy. Claire argued he still belonged to the wild. His howls reached into forests, calling to packs that still roamed. His eyes lit when he scented the wind. He was no pet, no exhibit. He was a survivor meant for freedom. But policies rarely bowed to sentiment. Regulations demanded evaluation, health checks, decisions made not by heart, but by law. One evening, a meeting was held at the town hall. Farmers filled the wooden benches, boots, muddy voices sharp. Claire stood at the front, flanked by wildlife officers, questions hurled like stones. What if he comes for our livestock? Who pays if he attacks? Why save a wolf when people are struggling? Claire answered with calm but fire in her voice. She spoke of the species' near extinction, of the miracle that even a handful survived in the wild. She told them of the birth of 43 pups in 2024 and 2025, a record, a sign of hope. She told them the wolf she had rescued was not a threat, but a thread in a fragile tapestry. If that thread snapped, the whole fabric could unravel. But hearts are harder to move than numbers. Some still grumbled. Some still demanded the wolf be removed, transferred, hidden away, where he could no longer threaten their herds. And all the while the wolf grew stronger. His coat thickened. His muscles filled. He paced the yard restlessly now, eyes fixed on the horizon. Freedom tugged at him. And Claire knew with a heaviness that pressed deeper each day that she could not hold him forever. The legal battle intensified. Inspectors returned with clipboards measuring photographing. They spoke in the language of reports and liability, never once meeting the wolf's eyes. To them, he was a case number. To Claire, he was a life. One evening, as the sun bled red over the wetlands, Claire stood at the fence. The wolf lifted his muzzle and howled. It carried across the marsh, answered faintly by another in the distance. Claire's chest ached. The wild was calling him back, and soon she would have to decide whether to listen. The storm had tested their strength. Now society law and time itself tested their bond. To keep him was impossible. To release him was inevitable. And in that inevitability lay the hardest truth of all. Survival sometimes demands letting go. The decision came sooner than Claire expected. After weeks of heated debates, after endless forms and inspections, the Wildlife Service issued the order the wolf would be released. He was strong enough now, his wounds healed, his muscles restored. Keeping him any longer would risk habituation. He belonged to the wild. Claire read the notice alone in her office. The words blurred as her eyes burned. She had known this moment would come, yet the reality struck like a blow. All those nights she had sat beside him, all those mornings she had carried meat bowls and whispered soft words, it had led to this, to goodbye. She walked to the enclosure. The wolf stood alert as though sensing the shift. His coat gleamed under the late afternoon sun. His eyes, once clouded by pain, now burned with strength. He paced restless muscles, coiled like a bowstring. Claire's throat tightened. She wanted to memorize everything. The curve of his scar, the way his ears flicked toward the smallest sound, the rhythm of his breath. The release was set at dawn. Rangers gathered quietly, trucks idling crates lined with straw. Claire led him forward, her hands steady, though her chest felt hollow. He stepped into the transport crate without hesitation, eyes meeting hers one last time before the door shut. The ride to the release site was silent. Trees blurred past the windows, marshes and meadows rolling by like chapters of a story closing too soon. The wolf shifted inside the crate, the sound of claws scratching wood echoing in the still air. At the clearing, the world seemed to pause. Dew glistened on tall grass. Birds wheeled overhead. The air smelled of earth of freedom. Rangers positioned the crate cameras ready, documents signed. But for Claire, it was no bureaucratic procedure. It was a farewell ceremony, wordless, yet heavy with meaning. She knelt by the crate. "You're ready," she whispered, though the words were more for herself. Her hand pressed briefly against the wood. On the other side, claws tapped softly, almost in response. He emerged slowly at first, every sense alert. Then, with sudden certainty, he bounded forward, muscles rippling tail-slicing air. The grass parted under his stride. His silhouette merged with the horizon. Claire's eyes followed him until distance blurred him into shadow. She thought that was the end until he stopped. Far ahead, the wolf turned. His body framed against the rising sun, he looked back. Their eyes met one last time across the gulf of grass and silence. He lowered his head, not in weakness, but in recognition. Then he raised his muzzle and howled. The sound carried like a farewell song, like gratitude woven into wind. Claire's heart broke and healed in the same breath. Tears slid down her face, but her lips curved into a fragile smile. This was not loss. This was release. A letting go that honored both of them. The bond had been real. The bond would remain even as distance grew. For in his survival, she had found her own strength, and in her care, he had found a second chance. Farewell was not an ending. It was the beginning of the life he was always meant to live. The clearing emptied. The wolf had vanished into the forest, swallowed by shadows and birdsong. Claire stood alone, her boots damp with dew, her chest hollow with absence. Yet even in the silence, he left behind something stirred hope, fragile but undeniable. Days passed. Claire returned to the routines of the center-feeding owls, checking fawn shelters, filing endless reports. But no task erased the imprint of that howl. It lingered threaded through every moment, like a memory too vivid to fade. Then, a week later, a call came. One of the field biologists had retrieved footage from a remote camera. Claire drove out to the monitoring station, heart hammering. On the screen, grainy in the night vision glow, appeared a figure she knew instantly. The old wolf, stronger now, fur-thick stride confident, and he was not alone. At his side trotted two younger wolves, their bodies lean and quick, their tails held high. He had found kin, or perhaps kin had found him. Weeks turned to months. Occasionally, another camera caught him crossing streams, chasing deer standing sentinel on ridgelines. His limp remained a scar etched into his stride, but it marked him not as weak, but as seasoned. A survivor who carried storms in his bones. Each sighting was a reminder she had not lost him. She had returned him. At the rehabilitation center, Claire often found herself staring at the empty enclosure. She no longer saw absence. She saw a story written in mud, blood, and resilience. A story of what can happen when compassion meets perseverance. The storm had not broken him, nor had the trap, nor infection, nor fear. And perhaps Claire thought that was the lesson for humans too. Survival was never a straight line. It bent, it broke, it scarred. But survival endured. And there was more. The Wildlife Service confirmed the 2024 to 2025 season had been the most successful in decades. 43 pups, born scattered across dens, hidden in forests and swamps. Tiny sparks of life carrying the species forward. Sparks that might grow into songs, into packs, into futures. Claire imagined the old wolf among them, teaching by presence his scarred body, a living testament. She imagined pups watching him limp, learning that wounds did not end stories, they deepened them. At night, sometimes Claire still returned to the clearing where she had opened the crate. She stood under moonlight listening. And though the forest often answered only with silence, sometimes, just sometimes, a howl drifted back. It was never close, always distant, echoing across miles. But she knew it. The tone, the resilience, the voice of a wolf who had once collapsed in her care and now commanded the wild once more. She closed her eyes and listened, the sound carrying through trees and sky. It was not farewell, it was a reminder that some bonds never break no matter how far they stretch. What do we take from a story like this of one wolf, one ranger, one storm? At its heart, it is not only about survival, it is about connection, about the fragile thread that binds human hands to wild hearts, and how that thread, when honored, can save more than a single life. The old wolf's journey reminds us of what it means to endure. He carried scars, limps, and wounds that never fully vanished. Yet, he rose each time, choosing life again and again. That resilience mirrors our own struggles, the storms we weather, the traps we escape, the moments when we collapse but still rise. But it is also a story of responsibility. Wolves are not ours to tame or keep. They are ours to protect through science, through law, through compassion, rooted in respect. Every action we take matters: reporting a sighting, supporting conservation, sharing awareness. Because for species like the red wolf, every single life can tip the balance between extinction and renewal. Already there are signs of hope. The 2024-2025 breeding season welcomed 43 pups into the world. 43 howls waiting to rise into night skies, carrying the promise of a species reborn. Yet their future depends on us, on whether we choose to honor their place in the wild or allow silence to swallow their song. Claire's story with the old wolf is one chapter in a larger book. A book still being written in North Carolina wetlands, in sanctuaries across the country, in every decision we make about the land we share. And now the question is no longer what she will do, but what we will do. If a single ranger's patience could carry one wolf from death to life, imagine what many hearts united could achieve. Imagine forests alive with howls once more, not as echoes of memory, but as voices of a thriving future. Every life saved is a howl of hope.